Oibori Sangha Karvone Kedena Bhatakidere.
So Dharma friends, yesterday I explained to you the yoga of one-pointedness as well as I can. And so we have said that once we reach the greater one-pointedness, then throughout all one's activities, day and night uninterruptedly, one is always in a meditative state of clarity and emptiness, which is an experience of pervasive bliss. And the greater one-pointedness, which is the highest step of one-pointedness, when one reaches the greater one-pointedness, then one has arrived already at the lesser non-elaboration. So then the second yoga is non-elaboration, and the first step is the lesser non-elaboration. So when one reaches the last step of the first stage, then one has already reached the first step of the next stage. Thigden Sumgön had said that the seed of the later thing already abides in the prior moment. So the seed of the next moment abides in the present moment or the moment prior to it. So it's just like you have a seed of a flower that grows into a sprout and then into a flower in stages. So each of these stages are interconnected, not separate. Yeah, and so then the second stage then is the stage of non-elaboration. And so what is elaboration? Elaboration is the conceptual discursive mind that has many thoughts and many doubts and so forth. So you're thinking that this is how it is, or this is not how it is, and so on. And so you see things in a dualistic way, thinking of this and that. So this discursive mind is what we call elaboration. And non-elaboration then means to not have a discursive mind, but to look at the discursive mind directly, and whatever thought arises, ideally one liberates it, but if you can't liberate it, if you can't have it dissolved, then one at least does not analyze it and follow it. And so one just lets it arise and dissolve like salt dissolving in water. And so eventually then thoughts are liberated upon arising, the very moment they arise. They arise and then they dissolve. So the non-elaboration, that is non-elaboration. And so the mind that we still have during the first yoga of one-pointedness, that is from a perspective of not having realized the nature of mind, that mind is called consciousness. But when you realize the nature of consciousness, then consciousness transforms or literally transfers into the nature of primordial wisdom. So here then, in the stage of non-elaboration, the consciousness has transformed. Because then there is no more thinking, no discursive mind. And that's the difference between the consciousness and primordial wisdom. Consciousness perceives a dualistic existence of self and other, and in primordial wisdom, there is no dualistic thought. So normally, when we think dualistically, we see one another, and we see the outer world, we see many different sentient beings, and that is because what we see is really each other's bodies. And so once you have recognized that there is no duality, then even though you still see those bodies, you know that our mind is actually one. So you know that within the mind there is no division. And the mind of the pure natural mind and the mind of all the sentient beings in the 6 realms of samsara is one and the same. So that is the quality that arises when you realize the nature of the mind. So again, once you have reached the greater one-pointedness, you have also reached the lesser non-elaboration. And so in the state of non-elaboration, so one is in an ongoing state of practice at this point. And so now, generally speaking, first we speak about the accumulation of merit, and that's also related to elaboration or non-elaboration, because we speak about there being two kinds of merit. There's the conceptual and the non-conceptual merit, or defiled and undefiled merit. And the defiled or the conceptual merit refers to all the virtuous activities we do with body and speech. And however, they are effort bound, so we engage in effort, and also they are concept bound. So there is fixation to the good thing that we are doing, and we think that this is how it is supposed to be done, and this is how it is. This is true. This is how it should be, and so on. And so we hold this view that we have about what we are doing is very precious. And so even though it is a merit, it is a conceptual kind of fixation bound kind of merit. And so then we basically conceptualize things. For example, when we are arranging offerings or a shrine and so on, or a statue and so on, there is some kind of fixation, a kind of a certain view about how this is done in our mind. We think that this is how it's supposed to be done, and this is how I have to do it, and so on. And like the offerings must be that way; they have to be really very clean, and so they believe that this is kind of real, and so because of that, there's this kind of fixation. And then what happens is that, of course, when the things happen the way one hopes, then one is happy about that. But then when things don't turn out the way one hopes, then one feels very frustrated. And so the fault in that, in the mind, is that there is hope and fear. There's these fixations within the mind. And that is basically elaboration. So this kind of practicing of virtue is based on grasping at the concrete, true reality of things. And so that is basically what we call virtue based on elaboration. And also some call the generation stage, the visualization elaboration, mental elaboration. But then Jigme Lingpa had said that when practicing in the generation stage, this practice must be seized by the view, which is the nature of the mind, because if it is not seized by the view, then one runs into the fault of grasping at it as ordinary, as a substantial thing. And so, how are we supposed to practice or seize it with the view? So the main point here is that the mind is in a state of non-distraction, without any grasping thoughts in the mind. So when you visualize the deity from within such a state, then the deity arises, the form of the deity arises within a state of mindfulness and not discursiveness. And then as a result of that, in the end, the deity then is realized as empty appearance, just like a rainbow in the sky. And that is because you do not grasp at its true substantial existence. That's why you realize this union of appearance and emptiness in the end. So otherwise, if we visualize the deity from an elaborated, like from perspective of elaboration, then there is a grasping at the deity's substantial true existence. And so then that leads to various faults. For example, in Dharma practice and also in our worldly activities, our mental elaborations lead to many faults. And so in Dharma activities, then in our Dharma practice, it is in this context here, in the stage of non-elaboration, essential to sustain the view and meditation or generation stage, whatever one practices, without becoming controlled by conceptual thinking. So just let it be natural, unelaborated. And especially that is when we practice the deity, Sambhogakaya, because the essence of a Sambhogakaya is the union of the generation and the completion stages. So the deity appears clearly in your mind, but then what appears lacks any substantial inherent existence. So it appears just like a rainbow in the sky. And such appearance is undefiled by any concept of substantial matter or true existence. So appearing yet empty like a rainbow in the sky. That is really the essential point of the generation stage. And then also in the context of non-elaboration, it is to abide within a clear and empty state that is undefiled from any mental elaboration, any grasping at a true existence of appearances or any other fixations in the mind. For example, when you think, oh, I have to do this, I have to do it like this or do that, the moment you think like that, even when you practice the Dharma, because there is hope and fear behind it, there will also be a different result. So that is what we call elaboration. And so when we practice the deity, what appears is self-arisen and naturally appearing. So it doesn't appear as a mental concept. It appears naturally and in a non-elaborated way. So in our text here, in the stage of non-elaboration, first it says, at the lesser stage of non-elaboration, though one has realized that the essence of thoughts, perceptions, and mind is free from the elaborations of arising and ceasing, one still retains a consciousness that fixates on emptiness by ascertaining experiences of emptiness, and one still hopes to attain nirvana and is still afraid of samsara. So, in essence, this ascertaining experience here means that there still is, so there is an experience of bliss when one abides within this state of empty clarity or empty appearance. There is an experience of great bliss. And so at the lesser stage of non-elaboration, there still is a very subtle feeling of grasping, of fixating, or attachment to this bliss. So the non-elaboration in general. So there are different ways of understanding and realizing it. So we can either come to a conclusion based on an understanding or through experience. And so personally, it's maybe difficult to really for me to speak about from experience because even I have not reached the greater one-pointedness that requires one to remain without distraction continuously day and night. So I cannot say that I have reached that state, but there certainly are many disciples who are excellent practitioners and who are very diligent, and many who perhaps have reached that stage. So in any case, this non-elaboration can be understood from the perspective of an understanding and from the perspective of experience. And there is a slight difference between them. So how is it from the perspective of an understanding? So, for example, when you're meditating you're visualizing the boundless palace of the deity. And then there is this thought maybe in your mind where you know that I'm meditating, I'm on this, and you have this feeling of that I am meditating, I am visualizing this. And so then when you're meditating, it appears, and sometimes then later, when you go out into your activities, then everything does not really appear like this boundless palace, but then everything that appears just appears ordinary again. And then the mind again enters into the perception of seeing everything as a concrete, a true, existing thing. So the mind kind of solidifies again once we go, and not once we're in a state of when we're not meditating in session. And so then first we have gained this understanding, and then if we reflect on this understanding again and again, so then we think, for example, that this world is a compounded phenomenon, and due to that, it consists of small particles, and so the smallest particle cannot be found. So there's an endless mass of particles, so then when we look at this world and it appears to be so real, and so if we think about non-elaboration, we go through this process of thinking, it consists of these particles and therefore it's impermanent because it is a compounded phenomenon, and whatever appears does not inherently really exist, but it only appears momentarily, and then again it will go out of existence. In the end, this world, this planet will collapse because it is impermanent. And this is something actually also science knows. And actually, whatever science discovers is also a discovery of wisdom, because it is everything that's done in this world is actually done by wisdom. And wisdom is actually the Buddha. So also science actually possesses this aspect of the Buddha, of wisdom within them. And this is how they actually are also connected to the Buddha Dharma. But so in any case, now when we go through this reflection about the world, so then we think, so the world, does it exist or not exist? And we can't really say that it exists because of these particles. It doesn't really exist as one substantial thing. And there's nothing to point your finger at that possesses true existence. It will collapse in the end. It will disintegrate in the end. And then, moreover, each and every night, all the time, some planet or star somewhere collapses. And one day also this planet will collapse. So it doesn't actually inherently exist. But then if you wonder if it doesn't exist, we also can't really say that because we can see it and it seems to be really there. So it is just a momentary appearance, illusory. So this is also related to the illusory samadhi, where one understands that while one sees things, these things lack any inherent existence. And so once one understands that, then one goes on to look at the inner mind and the thoughts arising within the mind, and also realizes that these do not inherently exist. So when we look at the mind, we have all kinds of feelings of pleasure. We feel good or we feel bad. And we can see in this world there is so much suffering, so much experience of suffering, or you feel that I suffer so much. And so then one continues to reflect, that's because of my past karma. It's because of my past karma and because of momentary conditions that lead to this suffering. Karma and conditions have created this body, and once we have a body, we do experience real suffering and real pain. So you can't really tell somebody it's not real, there's no real suffering. Saying that is really just empty words, because we can't really say that there is no suffering too, because there is no one who doesn't suffer. Everyone suffers because we have a body, so we have physical sensation of pain. So of course everyone feels that. There is that experience of suffering. But in any case, ultimately it is related, of course, to the thinking in our mind. So how it is when somebody has realized that nature of the mind, when one rests within the view, the natural state of the mind is in a clear, pure state, just like pure water. And with pure water, you can do many things. When it becomes completely pure, you can even use it as eye drops and pour it in your eyes. But when the water is dirty, then you can't do anything with it. So then it has become something not useful. And so in any case, when one has realized the view, the natural state of the mind, and that is connected to the state of non-elaboration or the special insight, where one sees the nature of the mind, and then seeing it, one recognizes that all some phenomena of samsara and nirvana are only temporary appearances, and they lack any true existence. They are like illusions. If you think that they are real, you can't really find anything that really possesses any true existence. And so, therefore, they are here on the one hand, but then also do not exist on the other hand. So, the non-elaboration from the perspective of an experience actually seems to be easier than the intellectual process of understanding. Because from experience, for example, an experience is when a thought arises, and normally we cling to the truth of this thought. So you think something like, this is how it is, or this is real, this is true. And then one thought leads to another, and you cling to a chain of thoughts. So whatever thought arises, for example, a very strong affliction arises, if you rest within the view, so in this non-elaborated state, without analyzing, and you just basically the thought arises from within a recognition where you already know that the basis of mind from which it arises doesn't inherently exist, and nothing arising from it inherently exists. So the afflictive emotion arising also does not really exist. It is just like, when you recognize that, it is just like a wood meeting with fire, and in this way thoughts become liberated. So this is an experience, and so when we experience that, we can really gain a deeper understanding than when we intellectually analyze or investigate this point. So basically, from an experiential perspective, whatever arises within the mind, it just rests within this unelaborated state without analyzing what arises or pursuing it. And so many of the great lamas have taught about this experience. So this is what they say. And so now this stage of non-elaboration, in brief, in essence, is the mind that does not elaborate. So as long as you do not analyze what arises, that is sufficient for the state of non-elaboration, and that is really it. So you neither think it is something is or something isn't, and you just think nothing whatsoever, not this and not that. Thoughts just come and go, just like clouds dissolving in the sky. So thoughts arise and then they subside back into the mind. In the Ganges Mahamudra text, it says, without a single thought, decisively look at your true nature, your ultimate nature. When you know the nature of the mind, then you will just stay in a state of no thought, no matter what arises. And then when you stay in such an unelaborated state, then no thought, no fixation can remain there. So that is when you have attained stability in this unelaborated state. Then no fixation or thought can remain in the mind, just naturally. So when you have gained experience in the view, then the moment the thought arises, instantly it already dissolves in itself, in its own natural state. So that is the essence of the stage of non-elaboration. So in terms of deciding upon the view, gaining certainty in the view, there's basically two kinds. So that is not a view of the stage of non-elaboration. So as we have said before, when one has reached the the greater one-pointedness one has simultaneously reached, the lesser non-elaboration. So there's two kinds of individuals. This is how it is taught in the Dzogchen teachings. So one of them is a practitioner who is very diligent and makes great effort, and they should practice the Togal, which is the crossing over, direct crossing in the Dzogchen practice. And then the other one is a little bit lazy, and they should practice the Chekchu, which is the direct cutting through. And so regarding the view, so this is how both of them ascertain the view. So depending on what kind of individual one is, there's these two ways of ascertaining the view. And then also, now from the perspective of the Madhyamaka and so forth, which, for example, the Khenpos here and so forth have studied, here we ascertain the view on the basis of the scriptures and logic. And, for example, by following the reasoning of the Madhyamaka, the middle way, and the Pramana, the valid cognition. And so through understanding, coming to an understanding, one cuts through all one's doubts and misconceptions about it. And so Milarepa also had said that the view, one's view must be connected to the scriptures and to logic, to reasoning. So he said that is there not someone who has ascertained the view of basically flawlessly, and if so, then it is someone who has based their view on logic and the scriptures. So in this way, we cut through the doubts, because doubts still arise in our mind. And so this is also how it is taught by the various Khenpos and so on. In any case, there is those who are diligent, and then there's those who are a little bit lazy. And therefore, there's a different way to engage in practice from their perspective. So when we, now from a meditative perspective, for those who are a bit lazy and have to make greater effort, for example, there's also one teaching that I encountered when I was very young, as a boy, and that was something that Niguma, who was the consort of Naropa, told Naropa. And so then when I saw that instruction, actually, I immediately wrote that down and also held on to it. So that was an instruction on meditation. And so she said that, the instruction said that in the beginning, your wisdom, your awareness is like a small fire spark, but you should nurture this spark of fire again and again until it grows into a big fire. And so this spark is our mindfulness, the mind that is still and does not analyze various objects. So it is mindfulness, and that needs to be developed. And we develop it, we nurture this fire to make it grow stronger by recognizing all the different thoughts arising in the mind, even the very subtle thoughts arising in the mind. And when they are clearly recognized, then they will, in fact, collapse into themselves. And then eventually, the small spark of fire becomes a large fire. But it begins with a small spark of fire. So first, for example, in Tibet, when we make fire, it begins with this small spark, and then we have to put in like smaller pieces of wood and twigs and pieces of dry twigs and so forth to make it slowly grow bigger. And then later, when it gets bigger, then we can put bigger logs in it. So it begins with a small spark of mindfulness. And this mindfulness first recognizes the less intense thoughts, or the smaller thoughts, so to speak. And mindfulness burns them, so the thoughts disappear. And then you keep sustaining mindfulness over and over again. And then eventually you will be able to let go of all the smaller thoughts, without any of them remaining left behind. And then eventually you can also tackle the more coarse, more intense thoughts and emotions. And then eventually they will all become, all dissolve on their own. It will cut through them. So that is the cutting through, direct cutting through, which is meant for the a bit more lazy ones. And so eventually one will naturally be able to cut through whatever thought arises. And that is through practice. And then mindfulness becomes natural and effortless. So practice in this way. Try to first recognize all the subtle thoughts arising in the mind and liberate them, let them dissolve until there is not even a trace of it left behind. In the beginning, it's more difficult to let go of all the more intense thoughts arising in the mind, but later, if you practice with diligence, you will also be able to liberate these thoughts. And eventually, you will stay within this state single-pointedly day and night, just naturally without any effort. And then, especially, even though if that's difficult right now, so even though we haven't achieved this level of sustaining this all the time, at least in times of difficulties, you should remember this. You should remember the view. And at times when you're afraid, or for example, even in a dream when you're afraid, if you're able to remember the view, then the fear will go away. You recognize that this frightening appearance is just an imprint of your own mind. And this mindfulness, seeing that, burns away this imprint. And so eventually then in this way, the consciousness is transferred or transforms into primordial wisdom. As I mentioned before, a sign, what is a sign of that? A sign of practice, a sign of meditation, is an absence of afflictive emotions. And so an absence of afflictive emotions, however, does not mean, in fact, no afflictive emotions. What it means is that an afflictive emotion still arises, that they do arise, they will still arise, but they will dissolve the moment they arise. So they will be immediately liberated. So that's an absence of afflictive emotions, basically. So there is those two paths, or two kinds of individuals. So yesterday I mentioned that the one-pointedness, the essence of one-pointedness is one's ability to hold the thoughts at bay. So kind of to suppress the thoughts first. So then when one is able to hold thoughts at bay, then one does not become controlled by them. So one recognizes the thoughts, but one does not get carried away by unmindfulness and fall under the sway of these afflictions. So that's in the context of one-pointedness. And now in the context of non-elaboration, here the thoughts are uprooted entirely. So they are not just suppressed, but they are completely eliminated. And that comes from a direct experience of meditation. And so as I mentioned before, it begins with the first understanding from the perspective of the scriptures and the logic, so we reason through it, as we mentioned before. So we understand the nature of all phenomena in samsara and nirvana, and we have mentioned scientists and so on. In fact, there was a scientist, a very skilled and famous scientist, who was analyzing all the various matter, like a physicist. And he found that no matter how deep you go into all matter, you can't really find anything in the end. You can dissect things endlessly, but you can't really find a thing. So basically, he came to this conclusion that nothing can be found, but he couldn't really come up with the right word for that phenomenon, that of not finding something. And then later on, finally, he encountered the teachings of the Buddha, and the Buddha called that emptiness. And he said that it is incredible that the Buddha found the right word for that. He couldn't find the right word for this lack of finding, this inability of finding anything. And so the Buddha came actually up with this word that helped science later. But however, in the Buddhist view, this emptiness is not just emptiness in the sense of nothingness. So that also we don't accept in the Buddhist view. But in any case, this scientist did find something very valuable in the Buddhist teachings. And so anyways, so then in the non-elaboration now, we have said at this point we not just hold thoughts at bay, but we uproot thoughts entirely. And when we uproot thoughts, this uprooting comes from knowing, just like the scientist, that things do not inherently exist. There is nothing actually to be found. And so because there's nothing really there, there's also nothing to do. There's nothing to be done about it because there's nothing there. And so the Buddha had called this realization primordial or self-knowing, primordial wisdom. The realization of the nature of mind, or it's called the attainment of the state of Vajradhara. It's called the view of Mahamudra. So basically, when one realizes emptiness, one does not fall into either of two extremes, the extremes of eternalism or nihilism. And that is actually a special quality of the Buddhist view. It dispels the extremes. So the extreme of nihilism or of eternalism is dispelled due to the empty essence of everything, because nothing possesses true existence. Mind is like space. And then the extreme of nihilism is dispelled by the natural clarity. There's not just nothing, but there's also a clear awareness there that knows that. So that is what we call the union of clarity and emptiness. We call it Vajradhara with consort, and like the Buddhas and their consorts and so on, representing bliss or clarity and emptiness. So this is the wisdom that the scientist, this particular scientist, had received from the Buddha. And there was really no one else before that who had come up with a good term for this phenomenon, but the Buddha did. So in any case, so we found this name in the Buddhist view. So now we call it Vajradhara and so forth, but it's emptiness. And so now the stage of non-elaboration is the stage where we uproot all the thoughts. And we uproot all the thoughts by recognizing first all the smaller thoughts. So whatever thought or emotion arises, it must be encountered with the view, with mindfulness. And then just naturally, it will be like fire burning away wood. And eventually it will become effortless. And then you always stay within this clear state. So then no matter what is the circumstance of your life, if you're happy or suffer and so on, whatever, you have a problem, in this moment, if you have achieved this level, then no matter what else is going on, you will come to a state of clarity, and that state of clarity is very blissful, no matter what else is going on in your life. So that is a sign of having recognized the natural state of the mind. If we have not recognized it, then suffering will just overwhelm us, and we will not be able to let go of it. And that is now the special quality of the Buddhist view in the context of meditation now. It is just like the fire and wood, and through the meeting of fire and wood, or awareness with thought, afflictive emotions are transformed into primordial wisdom. So that is the instruction given by Naropa's consort. So you must nurture the little spark of wisdom again and again with mindfulness. And what that also implies is that there is no other wisdom anywhere than the mindfulness that just grows stronger and stronger. And so once the mind has become completely pure, then we call that state primordial wisdom, or discriminating, transcendent wisdom. It is the mind that does no longer grasp at a duality of self and other. So all dualistic thoughts will dissolve within that state. It is just like pure water. Pure water can purify dirty water, but dirty water cannot purify pure water. So it's just like the pure water naturally purifying all the defilements. So the afflictions become themselves primordial wisdom. So how does that happen? For example, when you get very angry, somebody who understands the view, the nature of the mind, and then they get very angry, they still get angry, but they would not look at the object that makes them angry, but they would directly look at the anger itself. And it is said that the nature of anger is called mirror-like wisdom. Mirror because it is extremely clear. Anger has this quality of clarity, of pristine clarity. Because anger is a very powerful emotion, so it has this quality of really sharp clarity. But the problem that, of course, that anger often leads to in an ordinary sense is that, for example, if there are two companions who spend most of their life together, maybe they stay together for 20, 30 or so years happily, and then one day they get angry at each other and everything is destroyed. And maybe they even kill each other or they go separate ways and so on. So what is destroyed is the love that they had for such a long time. It is destroyed in a single moment. That's how powerful anger really is. And that is the destructive quality of anger when not recognized. And so even though it has this destructive quality, ultimately everything always comes back to Buddha nature, and Buddha nature can never be destroyed. The afflictive emotion has become destroyed when the anger has dissolved, but not Buddha nature. And so when the anger arises and then dissolves through recognition, it becomes mirror-like wisdom, because when anger is present, the mind is extremely clear. It's very powerful. And so in this way, the afflictive emotion becomes actually medicinal in a sense, because it makes the mind very clear if you recognize it. And of course, if we do not look at it, if we do not look at our own affliction, but if we focus on the person that made us angry, then of course the anger will only get stronger, grow stronger and stronger. But instead, if you look inside and if you look at the anger directly without looking at the person and you meditate, then the anger itself, the emotion itself actually arises as meditation. So we also speak of the afflictive emotion arises as wisdom. So that's the meaning of that. Actually, in the Dzogchen practices, it is said that afflictive emotions must be strong, they must arise, because they are utilized as an enhancement to our practice. So that is why in the secret mantra and the Vajrayana, actually, there is no rejection of the afflictive emotions. And Milarepa also said that when you realize that there is no difference between afflictive emotions and primordial wisdom, you have perfected realization. So we realize ultimately that the afflictive emotion does not really exist, and that the actual nature of the afflictive emotion is primordial wisdom. So this is from an experiential perspective. And if you, I feel that it might be of great benefit to view this from an experiential perspective. So this is how it is taught. So these words, each of these words should be really applied to your own practice. So really apply it to your own mind. So again, Milarepa had said the essence of one-pointedness is to hold thoughts at bay. So you have to see from your own experience, am I able to do that? Am I able to hold my emotions at bay or not? So you can see it for yourself. And then for non-elaboration, Milarepa said, non-elaboration is an ability to cut through, to uproot all the thoughts. And so again, you have to see for yourself, are you able to do that or not? So for example, if there is a person that gives you a really hard time and just harms you whenever they can, so a person that just makes you really angry, then have this anger arise, and then look at the anger at that person, your resentment at that person, and practice, meditate with the anger. And when the anger dissolves, and when you see the person again, and there's still no anger, there's no feeling that arises when you see them again, then you can trust yourself that you have uprooted the afflictive emotion. So for that, you really have to look at your own experience. Milarepa also said that meditation has to happen based on experience. So he said that when thoughts dissolve into Dharmakaya, is someone who has recognized that when the thoughts dissolve, they become Dharmakaya, dissolving into Dharmakaya. Is there someone who has an actual experience in that? So meditation must be based on experience, or must be infused with an actual experience. So again, what's the experience? So an afflictive emotion arises. Then you recognize, so an afflictive emotion has arisen in me. Then I meditated, and then the afflictive emotion went away. And then I felt really joyful, really happy. So when an afflictive emotion arises and it goes away completely, then you have uprooted it. And so what's important is that actually you have to be able to let go, not just of those negative thoughts, but also of the positive thoughts, of the blissful thoughts. Also, you have to be able to let go of bliss. And actually, it's a bit more easy actually to let go of suffering, but it's more difficult to let go of bliss. And so here you have to try a little bit harder to let go of bliss too. And so from my own personal experience, then I found that personally, having been able to let go of anger, and anger completely dissolves, then I've also been actually able to let go dissolve all the other afflictive emotions. And so therefore I trust in that experience. And so, as I mentioned before, now the lesser stage of non-elaboration. So there still is, where it says, one still has a hope to attain nirvana and is afraid of samsara. And so actually regarding that, sometimes my disciples ask a question about that. For example, one said, so I hear that when I attain the state of enlightenment, then I have to come back and help sentient beings. Do I have to come back to help sentient beings? Because if I have to come back to help sentient beings, then I'm again back into this suffering existence of the six realms. And if that's the case, why would anyone want to attain Buddhahood? So on the one hand, of course, it kind of makes some sense, but also once one has attained the state of Buddhahood, one doesn't see things like that anymore. One sees everything as illusory. One doesn't see happiness or suffering and so forth. Everything is like an illusory play. But of course, a person like that, for example, doesn't understand that. And they think that, then we have to endure all these hardships to benefit sentient beings. Because they think that way, thinking that it will be just like now with their bodies of flesh, blood, and bones. So that is why there is still like hopes and fears. So that is the lesser non-elaboration, and then at the stage of the medium non-elaboration, one has purified the ascertaining fixation on the experience of emptiness. However, hope and fear still arise with respect to appearances, and one has not completely ceased superimposing onto reality. So there still are subtle thoughts of hope and fear with regard to various appearances, very subtle fixations in the medium non-elaboration. And then at the stage of greater non-elaboration, one is liberated from the ascertaining fixation on the empty nature of all appearance and existence, samsara and nirvana. One is free from hope and fear. So then on the last stage of non-elaboration, one is free of hope and fear. And so now again from a practical perspective, so as if one still has these thoughts of hope and fear, so these thoughts of hope and fear arise from self-clinging. And if one still has these thoughts, it is a sign that one is not at that stage of non-elaboration. One has not yet purified self-grasping. And for as long as self-grasping is in place, one will continuously have these thoughts of hope and fear. They will endlessly arise for as long as there is this perception of a me, a self. It is said that as long as there is a grasping at me, there is also a grasping at demons. One thinks that there is demons, but actually all demons are nothing but self-grasping. And the thing with the self is that it doesn't actually exist. So if that self would actually really exist, it would be fine to grasp at it, but it doesn't actually exist. Actually, we are clinging on to something that doesn't actually exist. So if you only know that, actually, it's extremely beneficial. And so then, because the self does not exist, also others do not exist inherently. So this is what I shared with you today, as well as I could, on the stage of non-elaboration. And so many of the past siddhas have given teachings on the 4 yogas of Mahamudra, but the essence of all these teachings is really in the Ganges Mahamudra, and in particular one line that says, "Without a single thought, decisively look at your ultimate nature." So this was taught by Tilopa. So you should read this and many other of these instructions. Actually, speaking of Tilopa, there is actually one teaching that Tilopa gave that it really is the most important, most precious of all of his precious teachings. And it was actually put together by the Drukpa, the Danga. But anyways, it's basically there's 3 levels. There's 3 levels of instructions, and one of them I don't remember, but 2 of them are the most important one. And these are that the practice of the guru, one's root guru, is the best way to dispel any hindrance or obstacle in the Dharma, and secondly also is the best stepping stone or enhancement to a yogin's practice. And so practicing Guru Yoga in essence is to see your root guru as an embodiment of the Buddha, as the Buddha himself. To see him as pure, to cultivate a pure perception is really what clears away all hindrances, all obstacles, and what enhances your practice. So this is a very important instruction that came from the Drukpa lineage. Also, Milarepa spoke of like 6 ways of remembering the Guru and so on. But anyways, there are many different teachings on how to practice the Guru, but this particular one, those 3 levels by Tilopa, actually was taught to me by Ade Rinpoche. And so he said that the root guru should be seen as the essence of all the gurus and the essence of the 3 jewels and the 3 roots and so forth. So for example, the guru's body is the Sangha, the speech is the Dharma, and the mind is the Buddha. And it also means to see all the Sangha as completely pure. So it means to cultivate a vast, pure perspective, perception, which is what purifies your mind. Because when you develop faith in the higher beings, that purifies your pride. And when you cultivate compassion to sentient beings, that purifies yourself, the self-grasping. So devotion and compassion are really most important. So this is what he had said over and over again. This is how it is taught. So this is the most important point, Dharma friends. And for today, I will stop the teachings here. And if I've made any mistakes or confusions and so on, then I confess that. But also on the other hand, you have your Khenpos and so on that you can ask. We have 2 Khenpos here, for example, that you can ask questions, or you have your own spiritual teachers wherever you are, and you should ask them. And what's also very important is that you discuss the Dharma. That's very important in the secret mantra. Often when disciples, when they receive teachings, they take notes, but then they put the notes somewhere and they never look at them again. And it's also because we don't really have time to look at them again. So you should look at them again, but also what's important is to not just take notes, but also discuss the Dharma with each other. The Buddha Shakyamuni had said, you should analyze my teachings just like as clearly as you should kind of polish the teachings. You take them apart just like you would polish, cut and burn and polish a diamond. So then its brilliance becomes apparent. So just like that, you have to investigate my teachings. So therefore, Dharma discussion is extremely important. So Dharma friends, Shidelek, and see you tomorrow. I was so happy to see you, Dharma friends, today.
Sanjo Semjo Rinpoche Maje Bana Chijaje Jibo Nyamba Meba Yang Gong Le Gong De Peo Ai bờ sang cái tên chứ cảm ơn long lai